Hello everyone and welcome to my video presentation about my PhD project, my dissertation. This video has been recorded for the ICA 2020 virtual conference for the journalism division in the session called Work in Progress. So it's going to be a fairly short video. My name is Yuviki Dio. I am part of the Department of Communication and Media Research in Zurich, and I'll say we just dive right into it. So my dissertation has the title Political Actors, the News Media and the Power of Interpretation in Times of Crisis, a comparative frame analysis of the refugee crisis narrative in European and Sub-Saharan African host countries. I know, long title. So I'll talk to you about my research goals. I'll talk to you about the main idea behind my theory and my concepts, the research design, because there is an empirical study, and I will tell you what my current phase is, which will not be very interesting, and you'll understand why. So my thesis has two main goals. The first goal is to establish a theoretical model that combines framing and hegemony theory. That is to develop a integrative understanding of the relation between the media and political power during political and or societal transformation or crisis. And I do follow a critical approach, and for those who are familiar with hegemony theory will also maybe consider that as a critical theory. And I also have a focus on discursive power structures. The second goal my thesis follows is to conduct a study that is designed to test the empirical validity of the model that I will present shortly. This will be a very classical, this is a very classical content analysis where I look at the media visibility of the actors or certain actors, their frames, and I try to empirically show how hegemonization happens or how we can measure that. What is also important that I include non-Western context in this study, because the refugee or forced migration issue has been an issue that is more dominant in the global South, also in African or Sub-Saharan African countries. So this is why I have included that. And so my research question goes: how do governmental parties, oppositional parties, supranational actors, and the news media in Sub-Saharan African and European refugee hosting countries discursively construct the refugee crisis, and which of these actors is granted interpretational dominance within the refugee crisis media discourse by use of their narrative constructions? Also very long. So I will now show you the theoretical conceptions behind my study or my studies. And so I am using a hegemony concept that understands hegemony as a decentralized network that reproduces and produces effects of power through and throughout self-motivations and self-interests of various agents or actors. And the main element of this conceptualization is discourse or discourses, which are these blue circles here that have been moving a second ago. And we can understand discourse in the very basic sociological sense. That is, a discourse or discourses are practices by which actors imbue perceived reality with meaning. It's a system of thought composed of different elements like ideas or beliefs that systematically construct subjects and the world they speak of and speak in. And therefore, discourses are linked to policymaking and also linked to politics. So this is a focus on the processuality of hegemony rather than the static existence of it. And going from this vantage point, I try to focus more on hegemonization, which is a concept that more accurately describes how power comes to be. So we have to think of hegemony as a constant battle. This is constant reproduction of the battles over interpretational sovereignty, and a hegemony will then be a temporary result of these constant battles whereof a certain actor, a certain frame emerges as hegemonial by hegemonializing, this word is difficult, discourse. So you might ask how framing fits into this. So framing and hegemony theory share some conceptual common ground precisely because of the idea and the use of discourse within their theory. And so framing could be regarded as a discursive tool that has specific constructions of meaning and fixations of meaning. And if we go further than that, we can think of political discourse being reflected in the media like frames, where we can say media is the locus of discourse. So the media also contributes to the reproduction of frames, respectively, discourses. And therefore, hegemonializing discourses can appear in the media or can be even motivated by the media. And so I'm working with these key considerations that frames act as narrative indicators of hegemonializing discourses, and hegemonization can be translated into the consistent dominance of uncontested frames. So what I did was develop this kind of hegemonization model that you see here. And these circles, these differently colored circles represent actors. The dotted squares represent the frames. And this is all to show that within this given hegemony, you have different actors, different frames that may overlap. And you have the media that kind of highlights and scans for these frames and these actors. And according to my considerations, any frame or actor that will be highlighted by the news media would constitute could be a hegemonializing frame or hegemonialized actor. And this news media bubble can also shift over time, focusing on different actors and frames. And in my empirical study, which we'll go in a second, I will just focus on this bubble. So my research design is nothing out of the ordinary. It is a classical content analysis of high circulating daily newspapers in the major refugee hosting countries in Europe and sub-Saharan Africa. And these newspapers also represent or reflect the political spectrum of their countries as far as possible. And so what I'm doing is I'm coding 30 articles per newspaper per year from 2015 to 2018, which makes a total of 960 articles that I am coding alone. And so I have built a codebook. I've written a codebook which has already been tested with positive results. And this codebook has certain elements which are not out of the ordinary. So we have the article level where I check for author, genre, type of the article. And we have the speaker level where I check for quoting styles, speaker types, and whether the speakers are being contested or agreed with in general regarding their statements or what they do. And on a statement level, I check for each speaker what kind of terminology they use, what is the type of the statement, and of course the frame. And the frame elements, which I measure according to the conceptualization of Entman, and where the frame functions are my frame elements, which I have adjusted a little bit to make it more easy, to make it easier to code them, to make them easy, to make it easier to make them reliable. And I have deducted a list of arguments that are translatable to the respective frame element. And in the coding process, I'm matching speakers' arguments with the arguments of my list. And I also check whether these frame elements have been contested or not. So looking at if specific elements are being contested. What are my goals in the analysis? The main goal of the analysis is to kind of fill in the gaps of the model you have seen before. And I try to measure the quoting styles to determine the frequency of the visibility of the subject actor. So it's actually just actors that say something. And I plan to do a cluster analysis to determine the specific framing structures and patterns. And I also plan to measure the contestion to determine hegemonization saying the frequency of uncontested framing patterns. This also is to be translated into a hegemonization index, where it would be easier to compare the level of hegemonization between different actors, between different periods of times, and between countries or newspapers. So the current phase I'm in is coding. And I have finished 3 newspapers. I have 5 newspapers to go. So this is why I said it's not going to be really interesting, because I am just really in the coding zone. And I am also at the end of my presentation. And I hope that I gave you some insight in what I'm doing. I definitely thank you for listening and for clicking on the video. And yeah, you probably have a million questions, and I'm happy to answer them in the chat function. Or if you don't want to chat publicly, you can either reach me at this email address or on Twitter if you want to DM me. So anyways, yeah, thank you for listening. And yeah, enjoy the other videos, and we will see each other in some virtual form. Thank you.